The afterlife, spirits, and the paranormal have always intrigued me. My husband and I love to watch basically anything paranormal related. Like anyone who watches these types of shows, I did begin to wonder what is real and what is staged. We always talked about wanting to go on some sort of ghost hunt. As for my husband, he has always been a skeptic. He's one of those I need to see it to believe it kind of people. For my husband's birthday in July, I bought us 2 tickets to a public investigation at a place called Hillview Manor, located in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. It is a place known for its paranormal activity. The tickets I bought include a tour of the building, and then after the tour, you're able to go off on your own to investigate. The time slot for this investigation is from 7 p.m. until 4 a.m. If you would like to read up on the history of this place more, you can find them online at Haunted Hill View. Everyone thought we were crazy for wanting to do this, especially overnight for 9 hours, but it's something that we have always been interested in experiencing on our own. We arrived at 6:30. There were maybe 3 other small groups there to investigate as well. One of these groups takes this kind of thing very seriously and brought a ton of equipment. Here we were with our little backpack that had a few flashlights, a voice recorder, snacks, drinks, and extra batteries. We walked into the building and just felt creepy. Maybe because we knew it was haunted, or because it just smelled musty and old from being unused for so many years. The building had no electricity other than a few lights in the bathroom and the exit signs lighting the hallways, structural code for being able to have investigators and visitors in the building. After all of the investigators arrive, the people who work there give us a tour and backstory of Hillview Manor and its most active rooms. This building has 3 floors, long hallways, and many, many rooms, as it was once used as a home for the elderly, poor, and crazy. Not only were there people who ended their lives there, murders, but also many other stories of the residents and activity throughout the property. During the tour, my husband realized he did not care for the 3rd floor. He didn't really have a reason for it. He just didn't like the way it made him feel. With him being a skeptic, I found this quite amusing. I didn't witness anything out of the ordinary while we walked around with the tour guides. I asked my husband if he saw or felt anything, and he said he would tell me after the tour. After we finished with the walk through the building, my husband pulled me aside and said that during the tour, he kept feeling like something was touching him on his arm. It happened once in one of the rooms and again in the chapel. He said it felt almost like cobwebs rubbing his arm, but every time he went to grab it to pull it away, nothing was there. This creeped him out a bit. After everyone regrouped in the front room, we were able to start investigating on our own. We have never done this before, so we walked off, just the 2 of us with a voice recorder, flashlights, and EMP in hand, acting like we knew what we were doing. We walked the halls and climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. The floor my husband really did not want to go back to, but I figured we would just start there and get it over with while it was still light out. He didn't last long up there. Like I said, my husband just did not care for it. After leaving the 3rd floor, we visited other rooms in another portion of the building and tried to record a few sessions. We never experienced anything the entire time. I did a lot of talking. I was always respectful and just trying to say hello and talk with whatever wanted to communicate back. My husband didn't talk much. He finally admitted that he was kind of scared. As it started to get late, we realized how dark this building really was. It was freaky. We usually aren't afraid of the dark, but when you're thrown into a setting that is supposed to have spirits and paranormal activity, you panic a little bit. Now, to shorten this up, I'm going to fast forward through a little. Keep in mind, during this time, we haven't experienced anything. After realizing we're too chicken to keep investigating on our own, we decided to find someone else to tag along. We found another group of 2 to team up with. Who doesn't feel safer in a group, really? This other team had done paranormal investigations before, with this being their 6th one. We stuck together throughout the rest of the night, investigating mainly the 1st and 2nd floors. Around 11 p.m., we ended up in the atrium on the 1st floor. This is where the residents would hang out, play the organ, checkers, or watch TV. We held an EVP session for a while in there and decided to move on since we weren't getting much. At this point, I was getting kind of bored because I haven't seen, heard, or felt one thing all night. We walked out of the atrium and down the hallway. They call this area 1 North. From what I have read, and I'm not sure how true this statement is, it was the combative unit. During the tour, one of the guides admitted that she did not like this hallway or end of the hallway furthest away from the atrium. She just gets a bad feeling there. It's a hallway with patient rooms and a nurse's station. We stopped at the nurse's station to record for a little bit. Nothing. So we moved a little further down the hall past the station. We stayed in this area for a good 15 minutes or so without not much going on other than hearing slight shuffling at the end of the hallway towards the atrium. We laughed about it and said, of course now we're hearing stuff in the area that we just came from. At this point, we turned all of our devices off and got ready to move on. Mike, one of the others we had met up with, needed to charge his cell phone, so he knelt down to pull a portable charger out of his bag. And here's where things hit the fan. After no activity all night, I literally can't believe what is about to happen to us. It's 11:30 p.m. at this point. My husband and I are standing on the left side of the hallway with Mike and Jenny on the right side. Think of it like a hospital hallway. While waiting for Mike to finish plugging his phone into his portable charger, we all begin to hear heavy footsteps starting near the nurse's station. These footsteps grew louder, heavier, and closer as things started running towards us. The walls and the floor shook with every step that the spirit took. It ran so fast and so hard down this hallway at us. Before we knew it, it was between and through all of us. An immediate rush of electricity ran through my body. Screams of absolute fear escaped each and every one of us. I had never heard my husband scream the way he did that night. He's a tough guy, so to hear him get startled by anything was insane to me. I was backed into the wall of the hallway. My husband tripped over his feet and fell backwards. Jenny fell into the room behind her, and Mike stayed crouched down where he was still trying to plug in his phone. It happened so fast, but it was so real and so scary. My husband started yelling, "Okay, we're leaving, enough." We immediately ran into the office, which thankfully was not very far away. We walked through the office doors, and I completely lost it. I fell to my knees, bawling and shaking. I was wearing my Apple Watch at the time and received a notification that my heart rate was too high. I later checked this to see what the alert was for. In just 2 minutes, my heart rate jumped from 120 to 180 plus beats per minute. I knew they had surveillance cameras, and I told them they needed to rewind the footage right now and show me what the F that was. We saw nothing at all in this video. All 4 of us experienced the same thing. How was there nothing visible in that video? Figures we all turned our devices off since we were getting ready to move on. How would anyone believe us without audio proof? If we heard and felt it, the audio devices surely would have picked it up too. It was so forceful, almost like a train rushing between all of us. Whatever it was, I didn't get a good feeling from it. It elicited so much fear from me. I don't know if it was because I was so scared from this thing running at us so quickly and unexpectedly in the dark, or because it really was some sort of bad spirit. Here is a photo of the hallway from where the running came from, 3 minutes before our experience. You can view the video here. Now, keep in mind there was no sound. Quality is terrible. I took my own video of the surveillance. Around 11 seconds, you'll see us react to hearing the same thing. After I back into the wall, watch my flashlights, which are hanging off my wrist. The one floats in the air before gravity takes it back down. After viewing the video and trying to calm myself down the best that I could, I wanted to get away from this place ASAP. After my husband and I told the spirits they did not have permission to come home with us, we left, 4 hours before our scheduled time. It was an 1.5-hour drive home. My adrenaline was so bad I could hardly breathe. Luckily, my husband was well enough to drive. We got home, and of course I couldn't sleep. I was terrified. I couldn't be in the dark. I was sick to my stomach to the point that I was heaving over the toilet all night. I couldn't eat or drink. I was gagging on everything I tried to put into my mouth to eat. The next night, I had a friend bring me sage so I could cleanse my house and myself. My mind was all over the place. My biggest fear was that something followed me home. Everyone assured me that if something was attached to me, my kids and dogs would know. I ended up not eating for 4 days, not sleeping. I felt sick to my stomach and depressed. I lost 10 pounds in 4 days, and I was scared to be alone. I begged my husband to stay home from work. My dogs would run down the hallway in our house, and I would have some form of PTSD. Them running would remind me of the feeling of that spirit charging down the hallway through us, feeling the footsteps in the walls and floor. Loud noises startled me. I didn't want to be around my kids, my husband, or anybody. I just wanted to be left alone. My anxiety was so bad I was willing to do anything to help me feel better. I had people bring me Valium, which I ended up not using per my husband's request, and essential oils, crystals to put in my water. I even thought about having the house blessed. I thought about ending my life, actually. Surprisingly, that went through my mind. I didn't want to go on in life knowing what I knew now. It scared the life out of me. I wish I never found out how real the paranormal really was. I wanted to go back to how I was before having this experience. I cried every day wishing I could just feel like myself again. I began wondering about what really happens after you die, if spirits were real. Who was to say heaven, hell, God, the devil, aliens, and UFOs for that matter weren't real too? I would lay in bed, wide awake all night, freaking myself out while listening to every creak of my settling home, mad at my husband for being able to sleep so soundly, while I was unable to sleep until I felt safe enough after the sun came up. I did a lot of reading on the internet after this incident. I figured out that I was suffering from what was severe panic and anxiety due to trauma. Some people experience trauma after a car accident, a natural disaster, an intruder. But this was my trauma, a paranormal experience. Sounds crazy, right? How would I ever been able to go talk to someone if I needed it without sounding nuts? Fast forward 3 months and here I am, almost normal again. Still afraid of the dark, I won't lie. I panic if I'm left in the dark too long while I'm searching for a light switch, like I'm going to see or feel something or someone until I get the lights on. I am finally and thankfully sleeping through the night. It took me a while to get to where I am, but I'm so thankful that I'm healing with every day that passes. I totally respect the spirit world even more than I did before, and I will never barge into their space again. To this day, I still can't believe how bad the experience messed me up, how sick it made me afterwards. I am forever going to wonder why this spirit chose our group that night. Why was I the only one that felt the way I did after this experience? Who was it, and what was their purpose? The people who worked there were so intrigued, saying nothing like that has ever happened in the many times people have visited and investigated there. I will be curious to find out if it ever happens again. So me, my fiancée, and her children moved into our dream house September of 2018. At first, everything was perfect. It wasn't until a few months after moving in until we started to experience the strangeness. The first situation happened one night when me and my fiancée were sleeping in our bed. We slept with the lights off because that's just how I've always slept, and I never thought twice about it, ever. However, this night just felt different. She was making strange noises, and I felt very strange, as if though there was this static type of energy around the room. She started mumbling in her sleep, however, I couldn't make out any of the words. She seemed as if though she was struggling. I tried to wake her, but she just wouldn't wake up. I tried to ignore this and go back to sleep, but this static strange feeling got so bad that I had just had to turn on my bedside lamp. However, she kept making these strange noises, and it made me so uncomfortable that I had this completely what felt random, sudden urge to close my bathroom door that was diagonal to our bed. I can't explain what made me do this seemingly unrational decision, but it's as if everything in my entire being was telling me to close this bathroom door. Again, being a complete skeptic to anything paranormal or strange, I still couldn't shake this deep urge to close this door for some reason, so I got up from the bed to close it. I only made it a few steps towards the bathroom door when my fiancée shot up straight in the bed, gasping for air, and began bawling her eyes out. I darted over to her to comfort her, and she began rambling about how she felt as if something was holding her down. Yet, she said that she left her body, I'm guessing sleep paralysis upon further research, and she was standing in the corner where the bathroom door was. She said she saw me walking towards her, and that's what woke her up. Now, all this being said, I was a skeptic. I didn't really believe in these things. However, she was not one to ever make something like this up, and with a look of complete horror on her face, I believed her. After that incident, we both agreed that we just didn't feel safe in that room. Something felt so off, so we both went downstairs to sleep on our living room couch. That very same night, not even 30 minutes later, her son, only being 5 years old at the time, started screaming bloody murder. Due to the strange situation we had earlier, we were both still awake. I jumped up off the couch and ran upstairs. He was already running downstairs to us. We met him in the kitchen, on the middle floor. Once I was able to calm him down and stop him from crying, he was able to explain what was wrong. He said clear as day he saw black things coming out of his wall that were trying to hurt him. Now I understand that he was just 5 years old. He could have had a bad dream. However, this was the first time he had ever claimed such a thing. Even the first time he claimed to having a bad dream since I've known him, and I have been in the picture for over 2 years at this point. Again, being a skeptic just didn't seem possible in this moment, especially considering what had just happened 30 minutes before. I believed him, so I comforted him and brought him down with me and his mother to the living room to sleep with us. And my fiancée also got her daughter from her room because I didn't feel safe anymore leaving them alone. I just didn't feel safe at all. The next incident was pretty small, but I still cannot explain it. A few weeks had passed from that night, and me and my fiancée were in our living room. She was on the sofa, and I was in my lazy boy. We were just watching TV, and the kids were in the upstairs living room playing. I remember my fiancée's daughter distinctively came downstairs to tell us something, but she saw me. She started freaking out and crying. Us being worried, her mother went after her, asking what was wrong. She said the girl next to me was mad at her now. Now, this was very strange because the only ones that were there were me, my fiancée, her son, and daughter. So confused, we asked her what she meant. She directly said, "The girl in the weird white dress doesn't want me here." I remember being so thrown off from this it made me sick, especially after what had already happened. I knew something wasn't right. She said that there was basically a little girl in a white dress next to me where I was sitting, and when she went to talk to me, she said it didn't like her. I still to this day don't even know what to make of this. A few more weeks had passed and things had almost gone back to normal, except not quite. Since that night, there seemed to be a thick tension in the air. Something had shifted. My fiancée seemed tense and easily irritable, which was very against her nature. She would fly off the handle as things just a few weeks prior she wouldn't think twice about. She just didn't seem herself. The next experience that happened follows a few weeks later. It was intense, and before I say the following, I need the reader to understand that this is the truth. This still haunts me to this day. The details are a little blurry, because I honestly tried to push it out of my mind as best as I could, yet it still messes with me to this day. Okay, so it started as a regular evening. I had just gotten home from work, and my fiancée and I were relaxing downstairs in the living room watching television. Everything seemed normal. However, at some point I noticed my fiancée had put on some headphones and was listening to music pretty loudly. Now, at this time, I really didn't think anything of it. However, this was strange because she hadn't really done that before. Especially since we were both watching television together, it kind of just seemed peculiar, but I just brushed it off. However, she just seemed really agitated towards me. I remember thinking if I had done something to upset her, trying to rack my brain as I sat there, but I truly couldn't think of anything. So again, I brushed it off. A few hours go by and she just seems increasingly agitated, to the point where she basically won't look at me. She is sitting in the corner of the couch listening to loud music, ignoring me. It starts to unsettle me, so I begin to ask her what's wrong. She loses it. She starts to throw things at me, screaming at me, and we fight over what, until this day, I cannot for the life of me think of. I don't remember even what the argument was about, like at all. It was such a blur. However, the next thing I remember, she storms upstairs. Me, still upset and confused, I stay downstairs and continue watching TV, letting her go to give her space. Maybe 30 minutes to an hour go by and I go to check on her. I find her upstairs in our bedroom on the floor, in the pitch black, crying on the floor. I go to ask her what's wrong, but she doesn't answer. She continues to cry on the floor for a few more minutes. I continue to try to comfort her, but it's almost as if she doesn't even notice I'm there. She then stands directly up, almost in a trance, and begins shuffling around the house slowly. I follow her, asking what she's doing, but she never gives me a reply. She just continues shuffling slowly around the house with a strange look on her face. She goes from our upstairs bedroom, down the stairs to our kitchen on the middle floor. She then goes to the banisters in the kitchen and drops to her knees and begins banging her head on them. At this point, I know that something extremely strange is going down, but I can't seem to help her or get her out of this trance-like stage. So I just follow her. I put my hands in front of her forehead so that she wasn't completely bashing her forehead on the banisters. I was pleading for her to stop and snap out of it, but she completely ignored me as if though I wasn't there. She then stood back up and began walking upstairs. She goes into our bedroom, walks into our bathroom, walks into our closet, and drops to her knees. At this point, she is sputtering out what seemed to be nonsense that I can't understand. She continues to bang her head on the carpeted closet floor. The whole time I'm trying to talk to her, get to her, but to no avail. Eventually, I'm over it. I'm freaked out beyond belief and I just want this to be over. So I grab her and try to lift her up. She begins almost hissing at me, trying to bite me. It frightens me, but at this point I know that whatever is happening, I can't just let her do this. So I forcefully herd her downstairs the whole time she's cussing at me, making very strange noises. I get her to the downstairs living room and I put her on the couch. At this point, she starts laughing at me, almost evil-like. However, I know my fiancée and this wasn't her. The look on her face literally wasn't her own. I could tell something had taken over her or something. So I put her on the couch, asking her what was going on and what was happening. I can remember her laughing, looking me in the face, saying that she's gone. She kept saying it over and over again. She's gone. She's gone. She's gone. At this point, I was terrified. I had seen enough scary movies to know what was happening. I told her that I don't accept that, and I kept trying to get to her. This happened for a few minutes, all the while I had to almost hold her on the couch. The next thing I know, she lunges at me trying to bite me. However, this time is different. When she lunges towards me and grabs onto my shoulder, I feel this huge wave of energy that comes along with it. That's the best I can explain it, as a wave of energy. She makes contact with me. I feel this completely overwhelming wave of emotion and nausea. I immediately run to a trash can just a few feet away and begin dry heaving extremely heavy. No vomit comes out, but I feel so much comes spilling out of my mouth, yet I don't physically see anything. Seconds later, I then begin crying uncontrollably, harder than I ever had cried in my entire life, just bawling. I crawl up in a ball. I'm just crying my eyes out. I can feel this extremely strange emotion inside of me that I can't even begin to explain, but I just sit here on the floor and cry. I noticed my fiancée after I began vomiting. She collapsed to the floor. Even though I was crying my eyes out, I can still remember the way she fell. It was like a rag doll being dropped. Her knees just buckled and she fell to the carpet. Seconds later, she was gasping for air and crawled to me to comfort me. She then began saying, "I'm so sorry," over and over again. It only took a minute or two, but I left that house. I had to get out. The emotion that had taken over me was too overwhelming. I felt like I was emotionally drowning. I ran outside and my fiancée followed. As soon as I got outside, I felt this feeling disappear. I felt normal again. Me and my fiancée just sat outside in our driveway until the morning came. Nothing that intense happened again the remainder of our lease there. We moved out September of 2019 as soon as our lease was up. However, since that night, we never really felt safe in that house again. I struggled to sleep under that roof again. If I did, the lights were on and only a few hours a night. As someone who has always been a skeptic of the paranormal, I don't know what to make of this. I'm a science, fact-driven individual. However, no matter how hard I try, I cannot explain what happened. It was paranormal and it was terrifying, and until this day it still haunts me and my family. Nothing has happened to us since we moved out of that house, and I'm hoping it stays that way. I tell my story mostly just to vent because I have never told anyone this. It feels really good to get it off my chest. But also, if anyone has had any similar experiences and they feel they can't share with anyone, I'm willing to listen. You're not alone. My mother was a single parent of 6, 5 girls and 1 boy. I was the youngest. We all opened up to the paranormal at an early age. This took place in Hollywood, California in the late 60s. She knew her kids were all different. She was very supportive and never wanted to suppress our separate abilities. She would just tell us not to go around telling people because they would think our family was crazy. Looking back at life with my mother, I kind of tend to agree on so many levels. Something she always said stuck with me. People don't like what they can't understand. At the time, we were renting a house on Alexandria, but the owners wanted to move back in, so we had to move. Mom worked day hours, so the only time she could go looking at rentals was at night. All 6 of us would pile into this big yellow wood panel station wagon, and off we would go. The adventure began into the night. Most of the time, a door was unlocked. This was the 60s, all of us armed with flashlights, but we had to be quiet. The scariest times for me was when no doors were opened, so, me being the smallest, my brother would help me into a window so I could run to the door and open it for them. Now that I'm writing this, I believe that was breaking and entering. If there was a house that made any one of us uncomfortable, she would scratch it off her list and move on. It was hard to find a house that fit all of us, especially anything my mother could afford. One day I came home from school and was surprised to see all of our stuff being moved to the house directly across the street, where an old evil lady with her windows blacked out lived in the back. I finally found my mother and asked her what was going on. She told me that she got a really good deal she couldn't pass up. Just stay away from that old lady, she told me. It was an old 2-story house with wood floors, 1 bathroom and 3 bedrooms. It used to be 4, but the 4th bedroom, but a small portion in the back, was divided to accommodate another renter, that old lady. I must add that I was young and very small for my age. There was so much room and so much commotion downstairs, my mother was understandably distracted. I asked her why she didn't let me check the house for anything bad first, and she said, "Look, baby, there wasn't any time. It was a good deal and I had to take it. Why don't you check it out now?" Feeling very important, I went off to investigate. I went into the kitchen, big. I went into the dining room, fancy, and then I started up the stairs. Mom mentioned that there was a bedroom big enough for all my sisters, a place for all my toys in the hall, and a room for my brothers, so I was excited to see this. The staircase was enclosed with a door at the bottom. You went up 4 steps to a landing where it turned and then proceeded up from there. I got up to the top step when they got me. It felt like 3 cold hands quickly one after the other around my throat with such force. I tried to scream, but the grip was getting tighter. I thought my vocal cords were being crushed. They started forcing me backward, and I felt like I was going to fall, but they just held me there for what seemed like forever in my mind, my toes teetering on the edge of the top step. I couldn't move. It felt like surges of electricity throughout my body. Then they started guiding me backwards down the steps, fearing at any moment I was going to be thrown. I saw little spurts of my own breath coming from my nose. As they were guiding me down, I could feel only the edge of the steps graze the tips of my toes while I was trying to grip one of them onto each step. They got me to the landing and up at the wall. It felt like 1,000 weights were pressed against my chest, still hardly touching the floor. I was starting to pass out when I heard a voice in my head say to me, "You are strong. You have faith." I saw a white glowing light all around me, and I said the only word that came to my mind. Om. The universal sound of God. They then lessened their grip ever so slightly, but it was enough for me to drop to the floor and run down to my mother. "Please, Mom, please, we can't live here, please." I told her what happened, but she said it was too late. We had nowhere else to go. It wasn't long before everyone else in the family had their own experiences. We all hated that house, but we had to endure it until we could afford to move again. My brother liked to tinker, take things apart and see how they worked, if you will. He took the time to sometimes share that part of his life with me. I'd like to think that's where I got my inventor's mind and my ability to fix almost anything. He set up a workshop under the stairs in the basement. I sometimes found some of my electronic toys being dissected, then put back together on that workbench. One day I was looking for one of my toys and suspected I knew right where to look, but I was too scared to go down into the basement alone, so I took my trusted cat, Frischka. He'll protect me, I thought. I started down the stairs with my cat in my arms. I got almost to the bottom of the step when the light went out and the door to the house slammed shut. Scared to death, I felt for the railing and started to run back up when I saw something. Normally you could see the moonlight from under the house through the vents to the outside. Something moving was blocking the light out and quickly coming towards me. It almost looked like billowing black smoke from the back of the house. Just then my loving cat Frischka hissed and clawed me to get away. He jumped from my arms and escaped through one of the grates on the other side. I ran up the stairs as fast as I could with my heart pounding out of my chest. I grabbed the door handle and, jiggling it back and forth thinking it was stuck, I heard a loud, long exhale behind me, followed by the smell of rotten eggs. The door finally opened and I slammed and locked it behind me. When I told my brother, he said that he never felt good down there, and he kept the door always locked after that. My family was very involved in the church. We cleaned it every Saturday and helped with all the events and variety shows. Funny thing was that our family was so big it felt like we were the variety show. One such day, they were all at church doing something, I don't remember what. I had just arrived home from school and someone, I think one of my sisters, was supposed to be there to greet me. Now this event happened in the hall. As you walked through the dining room on the left, you walked into the hall. You turn right, and on the left is the boarded-up wall to the tenant's dwelling behind us, that evil old lady. Just thinking about her now gives me chills. And straight ahead was the bathroom. If you turn left in the hall, you see my mom's room that she and I shared together. Next to that, the door to the upstairs, and in the middle, the door to under the house. Well, no one was there, and I wasn't going to stay in the house alone, so I walked into the hall and sat on the phone bench. For those of you who don't know what it is, it looks like it's a wooden end table with a padded seat on it so you can talk on a corded phone. Anyway, earlier I saw my friend's dad's car parked across the street, so I knew my friend was home. I figured I could call him and hang out there. I could just wait for someone to come home. As I am sitting there, I hear crackling coming from upstairs. It must have been one of my siblings, I thought, so I went to the bottom of the stairs and leaned in on one foot. "Who's up there?" The crackling stopped. Thinking they didn't hear me, I yelled again, this time calling out a few of my sister's names. Still nothing. So I sat back down on the bench and waited for them to come down. It was quiet, not a sound. Just then to the right of me, it sounded like someone was pressing their body against the other side of the boarded-up wall, listening, then a muffled, quiet, evil giggle. It felt off, really off. The crackling noise started back up again, now coming from the top of the stairs, followed by an ear-piercing ringing inside my head. Feeling uncomfortable, I picked up the phone, not taking my eyes off that staircase. I dialed my friend's number, and before I could even say hello, I could see it as it turned the corner of the staircase. It was huge. It didn't have a human form. There were what looked like hundreds of eyes all over. It was pulsating red to amber. Then deafening sound, crackling, was coming from it, with sparks flashing all over its form. It was slowly gliding down the stairs, coming towards me. I then heard more prominent laughter, almost like a cackle, coming from behind that wall, and I ran. I dropped the phone and ran straight over to my friend's house until someone came home. Now please keep in mind that we only lasted 6 months in this house, so these are all the events that I know of within that time frame, and was confirmed to me by my siblings firsthand. A brief description of where this next event took place. It was the second floor. Standing at the top of the stairs, to the left toward the back of the house was my brother's room. Inside the door to the right was a short wall, and the foot of his bed alongside of his bed was a window. All of his beds in our house always faced east, then a desk next to his bed, then an open space at the back corner of the closet. On the right of the stairs was all of my sister's room. It was long and big and set up as follows. Closet to the far right, then lined from right to left, 4 single mattresses on the floor next to each other with all heads to the east, then a window. My family were all avid readers. Well, that's pretty much all you could do back then. Late one night, about 2 a.m., my sisters were all laying on their beds reading when my brother burst open the door, white as a ghost, grabbing his neck, gasping for air frantically, telling them all to go downstairs. He briefly shared his experience, then ran out of the room. At that point, he ran downstairs to wake up my mother. I witnessed this because I shared a room with her. Actually, one of the beds upstairs was supposed to be mine, but I always complained about seeing a man hanging from a rope over the staircase landing. Plus, I had too many experiences up there myself. The door swung open, slamming against the wall. He was standing there in a white t-shirt and PJ pants. There was no color in his face, and his neck looked like it was on fire. He said that he was just falling asleep when he felt a negative presence. Something caught his eye in the back corner of the room. It was the full-body apparition of an old man, and there was hate emanating from him. He started to sit up, but the man flew at him from across the room. He tried to describe it as it was quick, like 1 second he was there, and the next he was on top of him so fast, the curtains and everything else in the room were affected like a big burst of wind. He grabbed his neck with both hands, gripping tight, and was choking the life out of him. He said he was nose to nose with this thing, and to this day can't shake the evil image of his face. My sister and I both remember him saying at that time that the man in a guttural voice said, "I want your body." My mother put a cold rag on his neck and calmed him down. We all remember dark bruises in the shape of 2 hands stayed on his neck and chest for over a week, and he never slept upstairs again. Through the years, he never wanted to talk about this until I told him I was writing our story. Now on that night, all my sisters brought down their bedding except one. She was headstrong and stubborn. She was the cut the nonsense, it's all in your head type of person, until it happened to her. My eldest sister tried warning her that on numerous occasions she saw something dark lurking in the closet, and that one night she woke up to something pressing in on her while she was sleeping. But that didn't deter her. We were all dramatic and crazy. She was happy. She got that big room all to herself. Well, one day she was upstairs taking a nap. She never slept without the fan on. The fan was located all the way across the room in front of that closet. The fan was round in the shape of a fat can. It was about 17 inches tall and 14 inches wide, with slats going around it about 2 inches apart with big metal blades. My sister always slept with her arm extended out from under her pillow. She said that she was sound asleep. All of a sudden, she woke up to her finger being sliced by the blades of the fan in extreme pain. She pulled her hand out of the fan and ran downstairs to our mother. I remember that there was a lot of blood. My mother then wrapped her hand with gauze and papaya so as to eliminate scarring, and we all went up to investigate. The fan was still there, but it was unplugged. We couldn't understand how it even got over to her. We had shag carpet in the 60s, so it couldn't have vibrated. Plus, it would have had to have traveled over some articles of clothing that would have stopped about 5 feet away from the bed. You know, after having that happen to you and the fact that your entire family is now sleeping together downstairs, and the fact that she saw the fan was unplugged, wouldn't that make you say uncle and join them downstairs in the living room? Nope, not her. She stayed sleeping up there for about a month until she was forced to believe us. By this time, she had made the room her own. She took 2 of the mattresses and put them on top of each other and put them both long ways under the window. She told me that she was in the beginning stages of dream state when she was fully awakened by pressure on her chest. It felt dark and evil. She couldn't move. All these things were racing through her head when she remembered what our minister told her when we were in council about this house. He told her to try to communicate with it, ask if it would follow her spirit guide into the light, and the pressure started to get worse. The more love she sent, the heavier it got. She said that it felt like a cement slab crushing her body and expelling all of her air. I asked her how she got out from under it, and she told me that she prayed and said some things our minister told us to say, and it lifted. For the rest of the time we were there, she slept in the living room with us. We found out that a man did hang himself on the stairway, and someone shot themselves in the closet upstairs. As for the old lady in the back, she was a very bad alcoholic who practiced the dark arts and voodoo. She blackened out all of her windows to keep the energy happy, she told the neighbor. No one paid her any mind. They all thought she was just a crazy old lady. I often wondered who she was before this and what made her that way. What was so bad in her life that made her want to torment others, and even worse, innocent children? Was the evil man in my brother's room connected to her in some way? I guess I will never know. Our minister told us that the house could never truly be cleansed until she was gone. Ever since my young childhood, it has been the family knowledge, joke, inside secret, whatever, that there is the ghost of a witch living in my maternal grandmother's upstairs level. My older cousin, who is now in her 30s, claims she remembers seeing the ghost of the witch as a child, and from then, even to this day, is petrified of the stairwell and will not go up for any reason. My slightly older cousin, who is now 20, says she has been terrified with stories of seeing the witch for years, but she, like myself, was slightly more curious about it. Then I, a few years younger than I, was raised with the same tales. So she and I used to climb the stairs together at nighttime with all the lights out in hopes of being able to confront this witch ghost. It had all started with my grandmother sometime in the 80s. My grandmother, my mother and her siblings, and my late grandfather moved into the 2-story house in the early 80s. The house was under new construction when they purchased the house. My mother often boasts of how she was the one who picked the house. She was a child at the time and thought the unfinished house was beautiful. My grandmother and grandfather considered her opinion and gave it a look and ended up purchasing it. My grandmother has always been a person who believes in the paranormal. In her younger days, she played around with things like the Ouija board and tarot cards, but was never avid about it, just light stuff. Her interest in such things, though, spawned from learning about the heritage of the females in our family. They had been witches killed during the Salem witch trials. In fact, one of the very last witch hangings was held about 5 minutes from my current home. My grandmother's mother was always accused by the whole family of being a witch. This accusation may have had something to do with the fact that she was heavily abusive to my grandmother when she was young, fed her rat poison, beat the life out of her on her wedding night, constantly emotionally abused her, etc. It has always been believed that her house was cursed. I only met this wicked woman about 3 times, and there was always something off about her. She could convince you that she was the sweetest old woman in the world and hide perfectly how abusive she was to her daughter and her husband. Naturally, when my grandmother found that we are descendants from witches, she considered the possibility of her mother being one more seriously. My grandmother moved her Ouija board and her tarot cards and her books about ghosts into this new house in the 80s, and only after a year or so did strange things begin to happen. My mother and my grandmother both remember the first occasion of something strange. My grandmother was carrying a laundry basket up the stairs, and suddenly she could no longer continue up. She said it felt as if someone was standing in front of her, forceful as a wall and not allowing her to continue. She physically could not continue up the stairs. She said that the force felt cold and hot at the same time. My mother says she remembers my grandmother trying her hardest to push against it, but not being allowed through. My grandmother calmly said, "All right, let me through," and the force disappeared. It terrified my mother, and she said it was chilling how calm my grandmother was about it. My grandmother would often have her girlfriends over for tea, as her house is rather large, with 2 living rooms and decorative old-fashioned charm. It's similar to a small mansion, and she has quite a collection of tea and antique pots and cups. One tea party in the afternoon, though, would be the first visual sighting of the ghost of the witch. She was having tea with a few of her friends, all ladies, when one of the ladies looked up and over my grandmother's shoulder. She smiled at something behind her, then returned her eyes to my grandmother and asked, "Who's your other guest? I've never met her before." My grandmother thought someone else had showed, but she'd not invited anyone else. She turned around and saw that nothing was there. Her friends then began convincing my grandmother that they weren't crazy. They'd all seen her and described her as an old lady with long, wavy gray hair that's messy, in a dirty dress and with the saddest, most confused-looking expression on her face. Though she found it quite interesting and she did believe her friends, she remained still calm about this experience. Those girlfriends of hers suddenly no longer wanted to come over to her house anymore. My grandfather passed away, and several years later my grandmother remarried. Neither of them ever experienced anything or felt anything off about the house. None of the men who ever entered the house felt or saw anything at all. Some of the men are skeptics and some are believers, but regardless, none of them ever saw anything. It seemed the ghost of the witch would only present herself to the women of the family or women visitors. Given her heritage, it would make sense. My grandmother, who is still haunted by this ghost witch, has never had an explanation as to why everyone began regarding her as the witch. She simply says that she felt the lady was a witch. My oldest cousin, the one who is now 30, was the second one to visually see this ghostly lady. She was a teenager at the time she saw it, about to be 20. She was alone in the house on Christmas night while everyone sat outside in the large garage. The family often sat out there when they smoked and spent hours there. My cousin claimed that she was going up the stairs to use the bathroom, too embarrassed to use the one on the first floor. She didn't feel like turning the light on, so she just carefully walked up, guided by the light of the downstairs Christmas tree. It was then that she said she saw an old woman with a sorrowful expression and long, wavy gray hair walk slowly past her at the top of the stairs. She walked away into the computer room, which was once my mother's bedroom. It's currently, and was when my cousin had her experience, a room full of mirrors and antiques and my great-grandmother's belongings. My cousin said that the old lady walked to that room and she refused to climb the stairs and investigate. She ran out of the house, crying to her father that there was a ghost. He didn't believe her and laughed it off. She was plagued with nightmares for the longest time and currently refuses to go anywhere near the stairwell. After these occasions with the witch, she'd become a household name, and my older cousin and I were raised on the spooky tales. This was one of the many things that had embedded a fascination with the paranormal and morbid into my mind from a young age. My grandmother would tell only the young ladies of the house these stories, as the men thought she was crazy, regardless of their beliefs on the paranormal, simply because they'd never seen anything in the house. My grandmother told my older cousin and I the story of the night that one of her taxidermied birds came back to life for a few minutes. My grandmother and her new husband were both avid hunters and went duck hunting often, as well as fishing in ponds at nighttime. They had their best catch stuffed by a taxidermist and placed in a glass box. The stuffed bird sat atop on a cabinet in the computer room, the one the witch apparently walked to. She said that she and her husband were asleep one night when they were startled awake by a loud sound. The sound was of hundreds of birds chirping and screeching and flying. They thought that some birds had attacked their attic and gotten stuck inside, so that was the first place she checked. Nothing was inside, though, not a single bird. The sound continued, though, and it seemed to be coming from no specific place. She couldn't locate the sound. She went to open the computer room's door, and when she did, deafening silence fell over the house, and not a single chirp was heard. She found the taxidermy bird on the floor, the glass box busted into tiny crystals on the floor. This story and the infamous witch story led my curious cousin and I to venture into the computer room as many times as we could. My oldest cousin called us crazy, but we called us brave and curious. We only liked to go up at night because it created a better ambiance, and we felt we had a better chance of seeing something terrifying for ourselves. We played with antique mirrors, dug through old wooden trunks in search of my grandmother's Ouija board, and did ghost chants and witch spells that we found online. When that got boring and came with no results, we got on Microsoft Word. I'm talking old school with Clippy the paperclip dude, and wrote murder mystery stories. We'd write the most gore-filled story we could imagine, then print it out on my grandmother's printer and hide several copies of it around the house to creep people out. Sometimes the very old desktop computer would take control of itself and start searching for things on its own. We witnessed it type in a series of confusing codes and numbers, then pull up various pictures of headstones and scroll quickly through them. We didn't scream and run out, as our oldest cousin would have. We simply watched in silence. The computer abruptly shut off, and our only fear was that we'd get in trouble for breaking our grandmother's computer. The lights would turn on and off in the room, not as if flickering, though. They turned off and on dutifully, as if someone was doing it on purpose. Strange sounds came from the floor, like scratching and bumping, and the mirror always seemed to be in a different spot every time we turned around to look at it. Books fell off shelves, and the other, newer computer, kept on the other side of the room, would fire up by itself. Before my older cousin and I ever really delved into the witch story, she grew up. She was only a few years older than me, but her interest turned to boys and being popular in school. She had her first slide phone and stopped paying me any attention at all. We'd once been close, but her own social standards forced us apart, and she rarely spoke to me. She was rarely mean to me, but she acknowledged me only on holidays. She evolved into a preppy, popular girl, while I spiraled into a paranormal-obsessed young teenager who scoured the internet for gore and supernatural, and I still ventured on my own into the computer room upstairs. My fascination for the paranormal was deeper than that of my cousin's. Hers had just been a phase. Mine had been my entire life. Both sides of my family believe in ghosts and each have stories of their own experiences. The only skeptic, surprisingly, is my mother. She does admit, though, that she only doesn't believe because she tries not to, because she's scared to. My father, on the other hand, was my biggest supplier of creepy stories, and he always told me, if you go looking for something, you'll find it sooner or later, because he knew how badly I wanted to explore ghosts. So I never stopped looking in my grandmother's house. My great-grandmother, nearly 102 years old at that time, was placed into a nursing home. Because her house couldn't be afforded and all the money was going to the nursing home and the house to the state, There was an occasion where the family was invited to go collect some things from our house, anything that we liked because they were going to get thrown away anyway. I went and took some creepy old dolls from the 20s, and my mother took some sentimental items. When I was in my great-grandmother's bedroom alone, staring into the large Victorian mirror of hers, chills rushed through me, and I leapt when I saw a shadow dart behind me. I turned around and searched for what had made the shadow, but the strong smell of garlic and burning wood dizzied me and forced me to leave the room. The presence felt sad and angry at the same time. My aunt, who had more business knowledge than any of us at the time, was helping my grandmother close the probate on the house. It was her job to keep the house in good condition, so she had to visit it alone frequently. On the last day of having to go inside, she went to take the one item that she had wanted from the estate, a vintage lamp that reminded her of her 70s childhood. She took the lamp and bid the house a relieved farewell. She locked the house up behind her, and suddenly a massive bolt of lightning struck the yard just in front of her. The rain began to pour and the wind began to howl, blackened clouds bruising the sky above her and making a great rage of storm. She quickly tried to unlock the house, but the key seemed to not even fit in the doorknob anymore, even though she just used it. The door opened on its own after she pulled the key away from it. She ran inside to shelter from the rain and sat the lamp down. She claims she saw something run through the kitchen from the corner of her eye and, with the witch rumors about her wicked grandmother, decided to leave the lamp. She closed the door behind her, leaving the lamp. When she stepped out onto the front porch, the rain had stopped and there wasn't even a breeze. The sky cleared and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. She still claims to this day that her grandmother's house was cursed. A few years later, my great-grandmother died. I attended the funeral and my family makes jokes the whole time. My grandmother was hardly sad that this day had come, as she had had to take care of the wicked woman who abused her. She took care of her every need every day from her 70th birthday until her death at 102. She was relieved, and when the funeral home workers apologized and gave condolences, we all looked at one another. My aunt, stepping out of the restroom while the big ivory casket was being rolled into the chapel, accidentally whacked it with the door and nearly knocked it over, nearly killing all of us as we struggled not to bust into laughter. It was the most humorous funeral I'd ever attended in my life. After her death, my grandmother was plagued with nightmares of her mother coming back to haunt her, or being trapped with her in the afterlife. One night she found her husband walking around the house with a shotgun in his hand. She asked him what he was doing, and he looked terrified. This was the first occasion when a man in the house had experienced something paranormal inside it. He was shaking and he shouted to my grandmother that your mother is here. She begged him what he was talking about and he explained, I smell her. I feel her. Your mother is here. Don't you smell that? Her mother had always worn the same perfume, Elizabeth Taylor's White Diamonds. It was the only perfume she'd ever worn, and she spritzed it on herself heavily every day, sometimes twice a day. It was a scent that had sickened my grandmother's husband for the whole time he'd known the old lady. My grandmother recently tried to give us some of her mother's old jewelry because she wanted it out of her house so badly. She claimed it was cursed. I believed her. My aunt certainly believed her, and my older cousin, though so long separated from our experiences as children, refused to take the jewelry. I thought of taking it, but I already own a piece of jewelry that was passed down through the women of our family, through all the witches. It's a sapphire ring that saw several generations and for a reason I find more than coincidental, ended up with me. After my great-grandmother gave it to my grandmother, she gave it to my mother before I was born and said, give this to her. My mother didn't even know she was having me, a girl, yet. She asked her mother how she could assume I was a girl, and my grandmother simply said, just give this to her. And well, here I am, a very paranormal type of girl, wearing the witchy sapphire ring today. I haven't seen my oldest cousin in several years. The last time I saw her was at someone's funeral. She's a drug addict, and she moved far away. My older cousin got married and moved away and hasn't given the paranormal a second thought. It seems now that her memories have been completely erased when the topic of the witch and the computer room are brought up. It's as if she's a different person. My grandmother's friends never come around anymore, and whether they admit it or not, it's because of that ghostly witch. My mother thinks that my grandmother and I are crazy, but it seems we're simply more sensitive to these types of things. Recently, my grandmother said that she was in a store when a short, polite old woman approached her. She was in an all-white robe and she was shockingly pale, and she was friendly and exuded calm and happiness. She asked my grandmother to direct her to the exit, as she couldn't find it. When she was about to tell her where the exit was, the glowing white woman disappeared in the thin air. Nobody believes her but me. I have my own Ouija board, tarot cards, crystals, mirrors, antique objects, antique dolls, dowsing rods, EMF meters, and EVP readers. For about 3 years, I obsessively tried to contact one particular ghost, and it wouldn't surprise me if I opened the doors to something else in the meantime, especially when considering the lengths I've gone to. I still try to contact this particular ghost, and for now he only reaches out to me in my dreams, but if you go looking long enough, you're bound to find. This happened in Myanmar, year 2005. I was in early teens and on the way back home from a family vacation somewhere in eastern Myanmar. They didn't have modern motorways like they do now, so the highway we took was built along villages and farms, and so on, and you could stop anywhere you like. People who were involved are me, my parents, my aunt, and my cousin, my older sister, and our driver. We were driving home on that old highway overnight, and around 3 a.m. our driver got unusually sleepy. This was strange because he was sleeping all day prior to the drive and used to night driving throughout this trip. So my father took over and he got really sleepy within minutes as well. I was up while everyone was asleep because I really needed to use the bathroom, so I knew what was happening. So my dad decided to stop the car near a shelter called Zayet in Burmese. You can find those pretty much everywhere in the villages, and they serve various purposes. There were 2 huge benches in there, big enough to lay down in. I cannot remember the exact location, but it was somewhere remote near Naypyidaw, the current capital that wasn't built then. Firstly, the driver went outside the car to rest on the bench, and then I went out. My sister followed me and also my dad. There wasn't any light except from our torches, and there were no other cars on the road, so we didn't see what was around. Anyway, Dad, me, and my sister were resting on the other bench, and suddenly we all fell asleep, like out of nowhere, as we didn't even do our business. And then my sister and I woke up because we thought someone woke us up, and I looked at my watch and it was 3:30 a.m., so we weren't sleeping for very long. Everyone was still asleep, so I woke the other 2 up as I didn't feel right about something. So we quickly went back inside the car and locked the doors and fell asleep right away again. I had a nightmare which felt very, very real. I saw a Burmese mythology monster called Belu, a shapeshifter knocking my window trying to get inside to get us, as that was the village of death. She was laughing creepily and knocking all around to let her in, and it felt like hours. I woke up screaming. So were the other 3 who went outside the car. I looked at my watch and it was now 5 a.m. It was then bright enough to see where we were. That place was filled with ruins of pagodas and old cemetery. Dad and the driver quickly came inside and we drove off right away. My mom asked what was going on and I told her about my dream. My sister was like, "Oh God, you too?" She had the same sort of dream, but she saw a bunch of people carrying dead bodies, and she asked them where she was, and they said it was the village of death, and laughed at her creepily, and they tried to get her, so she ran away. My dad and the driver had some sort of dreams about the village of death as well, but with different types of monsters or ghosts in it. We realized that shelter we went was a place where they did funerals or prayers for the dead before they were buried or cremated. After a minute or so of driving, we saw a recent car crash site, broken landmarks, flowers, and it made us even more freaked out. The strange thing was that my mom, cousin, and my aunt didn't have any dreams, so only who went outside had those creepy dreams, and our dreams were connected and felt really real. The excessive sleepiness was also very strange, as we weren't that tired to be knocked out instantly. Anyway, they were just dreams, but the whole area and connected dreams gave creepy vibes, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. So it was around December 2013, and I was at university studying psychology. I was having a rough patch at the time with my OCD, but certainly no hallucinations or any psychotic symptoms. One of my best friends was studying the same course with me, and she would drive both of us to and from university, about an hour's commute. Like I said, it was around December 2013, and I decided to go to the toilet before heading home. We came from a lecture and the building was closing. Every other building was closed except for the main reception area, so I decided to use the toilet in there. It was around 6 to 6:30, and the receptionist had already left. A janitor would come and lock the building at around 6:30 onward. So I head into the reception area and turn to the right to the toilets. There's a heavy fire door, and you walk down a long hallway, and at the end is a classroom that was empty and locked. On the right are offices, also no lights on and locked, I assume. I have a genetic condition that affects my bones, so I've always used the disabled toilet, and I get quite anxious when I have to use the regular toilets. I don't know why. So I try to open the disabled toilets, and it's locked. I figured no one is in the men's toilets, so I decided to use that toilet. Again, the building is practically closed, so I assume no one is going to be in there. I open the door, and a silver-haired man with a suit on stands there looking at himself in the mirror. I didn't feel frightened, but as I went to take a step in, he looked at me and smiled, and for some reason, I backed out and went to close the door. He shouted no and headed towards the door. I shut it fully and went to head back out the fire doors, but then realized the disabled toilet was open and nobody had came out. The toilets are all within a few feet of each other, and there's no way someone could have left that quick. I decided to go back into the men's toilet as I felt silly for backing out scared, and when I opened the door, the man's no longer there. I walk in the toilet and look around and even look in the cubicles, and there was no one there. I don't think I even peed. I went out through the fire doors, and my friends were there sitting on some chairs. She'd been there the whole time, and I asked her if she saw anyone come out toilets or anyone leave the building. She says no, and I don't want to appear crazy, so I don't ask any follow-up questions. It would be impossible for someone to leave any other way. There is one entrance to the building, and my friend was sitting near the entrance. Anyways, it's 3 a.m. I've grown bored of myself wittering on, so I'm just going to head to bed and ask if any of you guys have any ideas of what could have happened. Over the years that passed, my nan's mind started to go. She started seeing things more and more. My family were all saying she's getting dementia, which I believe too. One night we got a phone call that she was found by the police walking the streets holding a clock. It was the start of her getting actual dementia. She got worse and worse as the months passed and had to be put in a nursing home, which meant we had to get all of her possessions from her house and take them to her new residence. I hated it. I never liked that house. It always seemed like someone was watching you. While we were getting all of her stuff, which took 4 days, weird things started happening. Like boxes that were stacked maybe 3 cardboard boxes on top of each other, the size you would get if you got a PC. The top one would fall. But it wouldn't land next to where it should have. It was maybe 2 to 3 feet away from the other boxes. This didn't happen just the once. It happened 6 times. Each time the box would land facing up, my dad, who doesn't believe in anything paranormal, just brushed it off as the boxes being uneven with the stuff inside. Yeah, okay, I'll go with that. On the third day of moving her stuff, we had to carry the sofa and armchair out. So me and my dad were lifting it, and my uncle was in another room wrapping ornaments and newspaper. As we were getting ready to lift it, my dad's face turned white, and he nodded in the direction of the armchair. There was an imprint in it that looked like someone was sitting on it and leaning on the arm part. The leather was moving. Not a lot, only slightly. But that was enough for my dad to walk out of the house. He said he needed fresh air. We went outside and we were talking about it. I was bragging like, "See, do you believe the house is messed up now?" He tried to brush it off as maybe one of us had sat on it and it was moving back to its original position. As we were standing outside, I was smoking and just happened to look up. The blinds upstairs moved, like someone was watching us and then moved away. My dad didn't see it and again tried to say there was a rational explanation. The fourth day was the last day I ever spent in that house, and it was the worst time of my life. We were in my nan's bedroom and had to move her bed and wardrobe out. My dad and uncle grabbed the wardrobe and moved it out and into the van. Then came the words I'll never forget. "Hey, you stay here while we take this. Put all the clothes in bin bags, please." Oh no. I walked up those stairs like I was walking to the electric chair. I walked in my nan's room and closed the door. I had already seen shadows and other things walk past doorways over the years I'd been there and didn't want to see another one. I was in her room packing her stuff away and think of how she won't ever remember who I am or that she's my nan. I packed 3 bags to the point they were almost bursting and sat on the bed. Then I heard noises like someone was in the attic moving. My stomach felt like it was turning and my heart was beating so fast. Then I heard what sounded like talking from the next room. It wasn't loud. It was like whispering, but sounded almost normal. I can't really explain it. It was just one voice talking, but sounded like it was having a conversation. It was a male voice. I listened to that voice for about 20 to 30 seconds, and then it stopped. I couldn't make out anything it had said except, "There's no point, and just leave her over there." A few weeks passed, and I had visited my nan in the nursing home. She didn't remember who I was, but I'd still say, "Hello, Nan, you okay today?" Her response was always the same. "Yeah, I'm okay, mate." Except this day, I said, "Good morning, Nan." And she said, "Anthony, where have you been? It's late." I felt so happy knowing she remembered my name for that one day. As time has gone on, she's gotten a bit worse. She tells me things about that house and other things, but I don't know if it's just because of the dementia or if it's true. A few of the members here wanted to know if I had any more stories about that house. I said I would compile a list of the things that happened to me and other people, so here are all the incidents that I can remember. When I was around 10 to 12 years old, I used to stay in my nan's each night until my dad finished work and could pick me up. I used to hate it. Once it got dark, that house felt weird. There was a room underneath the stairs. It was just a door with a space for all your junk like vacuums, brushes, mops, that sort of stuff. One time I stayed, my nan was sick, so she got off to bed earlier than usual because her medication made her sleepy. This one week I stayed there. I was sitting downstairs watching TV, and all of a sudden, this weird sensation hit me like someone was watching me. Nobody else was in the house apart from us two. Then I heard the door to the room under the stairs pop open. It opened to about 3 inches and stopped. My face became hotter than the sun, and I tried to pretend I was still concentrating on the TV, but my ears would not stop listening for something else. After I had calmed down and stopped panicking, about 4 minutes later I stood up and slowly turned around. It was the only door that was open. I went to close the door, and as soon as my hand touched the handle, something inside the room fell, like a mop had been knocked over into another object. I ran up the stairs, screaming for my nan. I was such a brave child. My nan convinced me it was a faulty lock on the door, and it was just by chance it happened to fall when I touched the door handle. My cousin lived at my nan's. She adopted her when she was a baby since my aunt didn't want her. Not just trying to throw personal stuff out there, but it's the easiest way to say it. She would occasionally go and see her real mother from time to time. When she was there and I was staying, I was so relieved since not a lot seemed to happen. We used to stay up all night in her bedroom, playing on her Super Nintendo, playing Mario Kart, and just eat junk food and have a good time. Every so often, we'd hear something in the attic. I never really paid it any attention since the sound didn't register with me at that moment. It got really late and we ended up going to bed. Then when it was quiet, I heard the sounds again. It was bin bags being dragged across the attic. The attic was full of Christmas decorations and bin bags and boxes. It wasn't the wind making them rustle. It was a heavy bin bag being pulled along the floor of the attic. Now around age 15, I was still staying in my nan's, but only on a weekend. My cousin still lived there. She was 19 at this point. We still used to hang around sometimes since we were like brother and sister. By this point, I stupidly took up smoking and confided in my cousin that I smoked. She said she would keep it a secret since I knew stuff about her too. She smoked too, so every hour or so we would go and have a smoke by the back door. This is a short one. When me and my friend went to the cinema, we ran out of money, so we walked to my nan's house to phone a taxi and pay once I got to my house. While we were in there, we were talking to my nan and our taxi arrived. So we walked out the front door and I was in front and heard my friend shout, "Ugh, what the?" I asked him what he was moaning about, and he said he went to put his hood up and felt a hand sort of block it, pull his hood back down. Let me preface this by stating that I have always believed in the paranormal, often seeing apparitions in my childhood home. When I was 2 years old, my family got a cat, and he quickly became my cat, as he was 2 as well as I had the energy to keep up with him. While I was young, he would often wander the house at night, checking the whole family to make sure everything was in order. If I was sick, he would stay with me all the time, leaving only to take care of business before returning to my side. In fact, one time, he very well may have saved my life by doing this. I had been sick with a stomach bug, and he had been asleep when I apparently vomited while laying on my back, and I began choking. He went to my parents' room and pestered my mom till she woke up, and as I was still only about 3 years old, my bedroom was right next to my parents', and she heard something was wrong. She went and got me figured out, and everything was fine. Now, as I said, I was young, so that's what I've been told and can't completely testify to the validity of that, but I feel it may be true, as he was always a nurturing cat. Throughout the years, he would sometimes be laying down on my bed with me or on the back of the couch behind my head, and would suddenly arch his back in a way that cats do around threats. Every time this happened, there would be nothing around that I could see, and at the time didn't think much of it. Sadly, he passed when we were 16, and I was heartbroken, as he had been in my life for as long as I could remember up to that point. We buried him in a lovely spot between 2 trees in my grandmother's backyard, and I believe that was that. Yet throughout the rest of high school, me, my mom, and even my stepdad would often sometimes hear yowling hello in the same way he did when he was alive. If you haven't heard a cat make this noise, it can probably be easily found on YouTube. In late 2015, early 2016, when I was 18, I had moved into a duplex with a friend of mine. At this point, nothing paranormal had happened in my life for several months, including the sounds of my cat. This is until one night, as I lay in bed, trying and failing as I so often do to go to sleep, I felt like there was a presence in my room with me. I opened my eyes, and since I was laying on my back, I had a pretty clear view of the room. One of my neighbors across the street had a security lamp that stayed on all night, and the light would hit my window and give a small amount of illumination to my room. This is important because to the right of my bed, right in front of the window, was a tall, shadow figure of a man. Immediately, an intense and powerful feeling of dread came over me. Now, before continuing, I want to discount ideas of sleep paralysis. I know this wasn't sleep paralysis because I moved just moments before opening my eyes. As I said, I was struggling to get to sleep. Another thing is that I didn't feel the weight that is accompanied by being paralyzed. I was simply paralyzed by fear. I truly thought this thing was there to kill me. As the figure began to slowly move closer to my bed, it lifted up one arm as if it was going to touch me. Then suddenly it stopped and the sense of dread washed away from me, replaced with a feeling of comfort. I watched as its gaze shifted from my face towards my chest, then followed with my eyes. There, standing just over my chest, was a large figure of a cat, with its back arched. Instantly I knew it was my cat. It simply felt like him. Looking back toward the shadow man, there was a wave of negative energy. Then he simply disappeared. The last thing I remember from that night was seeing the figure of my cat laying down beside me, as he had so many times during my childhood, before I finally was able to fall asleep. I think about that night every so often, and it always makes me happy knowing that he is still out there, watching out for his family. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and give and receive feedback from my community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends. In Hindi, pinatay ni Epstein ang sarili niya.